Cameras flashed, the reporters leaned in, and the energy in the room shifted the second Paul Rudd stepped onto the stage. It was supposed to be just another Hollywood press junket, questions about his latest movie, some lighthearted jokes, the usual PR-friendly nonsense. But tonight, something felt different. A journalist near the front adjusted his mic, his voice carrying that unmistakable tone, the kind that wasn't looking for an answer, but a trap. Paul, you've had one of the longest-running careers in Hollywood, but some would say the industry has changed. It's moving toward inclusivity, social responsibility. Do you think actors should adapt to that, or risk being left behind? The question hung in the air. Other celebrities might have panicked, might have stumbled over their words trying to say just enough to stay in Hollywood's good graces while avoiding backlash. But Paul Rudd, he just smirked. And then he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a rehearsed PR laugh, a deep, genuine laugh. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "You really want to start with that one?" The journalist leaned in, sensing weakness. "It's a fair question, isn't it?" Paul tilted his head, eyes locked on the reporter. "Is it?" The audience shifted. Some murmured. A few crew members exchanged glances. Something was about to happen. Paul leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice casual but sharp. "Who decides what adapting means? Because as far as I can tell, Hollywood isn't about telling great stories anymore. It's about telling the right stories, or at least the ones they think we're supposed to tell." Silence. The journalist's smirk faltered. Paul exhaled, shaking his head with a knowing smile. "You know, I got into this business because I loved acting, because movies used to be about entertaining people. Now it feels like you got to pass a test before you can even step on set." The crowd stirred. Some reporters exchanged nervous looks. Paul sat back, arms crossed. "I don't know, man. Maybe I'm old school, but I don't think the audience needs to be told what to believe. I think they're smart enough to figure it out on their own." The journalist pressed forward, voice a little more clipped now. He wasn't used to losing control of the conversation. "But don't you think actors have a responsibility? I mean, you influence millions. Isn't it important to be on the right side of history?" Paul blinked, and then, with the most deadpan expression possible, he said, "Which history? The one we write, or the one they rewrite?" The entire room shifted. The journalist opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The audience? Completely locked in. And Paul? He was just getting started. The journalist's lips parted, like he wanted to say something, anything, but he hesitated. Because he knew. Paul had just flipped the entire conversation on its head. The air in the room felt heavier now. The other reporters weren't just waiting for his response anymore. They were watching him struggle. Paul leaned back, completely relaxed, as if this wasn't the moment that could define his career. "You want to talk about responsibility?" he said, his tone still casual, but his words carrying weight. "All right, let's talk about it." He gestured toward the audience, his voice unwavering. "You got studios pushing actors to preach about issues they don't understand, pushing narratives they don't believe in, all so they can keep their jobs. That's not responsibility, that's compliance." A few gasps, some nervous whispers. Paul didn't stop. "And here's the thing," he continued, his eyes locked onto the journalist, daring him to interrupt. "You ever notice how Hollywood only asks actors to speak up when it fits the agenda? When it's a safe opinion? When it won't get them blacklisted?" The journalist shifted, gripping his notes a little tighter. He knew he was losing control. Paul exhaled, shaking his head. "I've been in this industry for over 30 years. You know what I've learned? The second you start thinking for yourself, the second you don't just parrot the same script they hand everyone else, you become a problem." A few people in the audience nodded. Paul tilted his head. "Tell me something. When was the last time a studio gave a standing ovation to someone who challenged their narrative?" Silence. The journalist clenched his jaw. "So, are you saying Hollywood is controlling actors? That there's some..." He let out a short laugh. "Conspiracy?" Paul smirked. "No need for a conspiracy when everyone's just too scared to say no." The room erupted. Some people clapped, Others just stared, stunned. The journalist had no comeback. And Paul Rudd? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and then he dropped the hammer. You know, I've been in this business long enough to know how this goes. By tomorrow, there'll be headlines saying Paul Rudd refuses to support progress, or Paul Rudd sides against Hollywood's future. The audience murmured, because they knew he was right. But you know what won't be in those headlines? He paused, letting the moment breathe. The part where I said the audience should decide what they believe, not a bunch of executives in a boardroom. Boom! The journalist blinked, stunned, searching for anything to say. Nothing. Because Paul had just won the room. And outside that studio, the internet was already watching. By the time the interview ended, the damage control had already begun. The network scrambled behind the scenes. Producers whispered frantically into their earpieces, debating whether to cut certain parts before airing. But it was too late, because someone in the audience had already uploaded the raw footage online. And within minutes, the internet was on fire. Twitter exploded. YouTube clips started racking up millions of views in hours. Paul Rudd just exposed the entire industry in under 5 minutes. I always thought this guy was just a comedy actor. Turns out he's one of the only real ones left. Notice how the journalist completely froze when Paul turned the question back on him? This was a setup, and Paul saw right through it. Some were calling him brave, others reckless. But one thing was clear, he had hit a nerve. And Hollywood? They weren't happy. Articles flooded in. Headlines twisted his words. Paul Rudd spreads conspiracy theories about Hollywood. Paul Rudd refuses to acknowledge industry progress. Why Paul Rudd's comments are problematic in 2025. But the problem, nobody was buying it, because the clip was already everywhere. People had seen it with their own eyes, and no amount of media spin could erase the fact that Paul Rudd hadn't ranted, hadn't attacked anyone. He had simply asked the questions no one else dared to. Within days, whispers started coming out of Hollywood. Some A-list actors, the ones who never spoke on topics like this, began quietly liking tweets supporting Paul. Then, one big-name actor broke their silence. A well-respected longtime Oscar winner retweeted the clip with just 3 words. He's not wrong. And that's when everything changed, because suddenly others started speaking up. Actors who had stayed silent for years. Directors who had been careful with their words. Even some screenwriters, the people who were often silenced first, started hinting at what Paul had been saying. For the first time in years, Hollywood itself seemed divided. Some doubled down, calling Paul outdated, claiming he was just bitter. But others, they saw something else. They saw a guy who had nothing to gain from speaking out. A guy who had been in Hollywood for 3 decades and still wasn't playing by their rules. And that's when the real conversation began. For days, Paul Rudd stayed silent. No press statements, no tweets. He did exactly what Hollywood hates the most. He let the truth speak for itself. Finally, after a full week, a reporter caught up with him outside a small coffee shop in New York. No entourage, no PR team. Paul, do you regret what you said in that interview? Paul smirked. Why would I? The reporter pressed. Well, there's talk that some studios might reconsider working with you, that your career could take a hit. Paul laughed, a genuine full laugh. Then shaking his head, he looked at the reporter and said, if telling the truth cost me my career, then maybe I was never working in the right industry to begin with. And just like that, he walked away. No mic drop, no dramatics, just a man who refused to play by the rules. And the internet, it went wild. Hollywood wants actors to say what they're supposed to say, not what they actually believe. But sometimes, someone comes along and refuses to play the game. Paul Rudd didn't just answer a question, he exposed an entire system. And now, the real question is, what do you think? Did Paul Rudd just risk his career to tell the truth? Or was he just another actor refusing to change with the times? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what you think is right, hit like and subscribe. Because in a world full of noise, we bring you stories that actually matter. What's your take? Let us know below.